You're listening to the Options Insider Radio Network, the home of the Options Podcast. For more quality options programs, visit theoptionsinsider.com or search for Options Insider Radio Network in your podcast provider of choice. Listeners can also access all of our programming through our mobile app available in the iTunes and Google Play stores. Select programs are also available via live stream at mixlr.com/options-insider. That's mixlr.com/options-insider. Don't forget to follow along with your favorite programs and submit your own questions for the hosts at twitter.com/options, stocktwits.com/options, facebook.com/theoptionsinsider, or via questions at theoptionsinsider.com. Bitcoin, Ether, Ripple, Litecoin, and more. Cryptocurrencies and other digital assets are taking the financial world by storm. This exploding market provides everything a savvy trader needs: volatility, volume, and liquidity. Provided you know how to find it. That's where we come in. Welcome to the Crypto Rundown. Each week, we'll break down the latest trading activity, trends, and developments on everything from coins to tokens, futures, and even OTC options. If it's moving the crypto markets, then you'll find it on the Crypto Rundown. This program is brought to you by Genesis Volatility, also known as GVol, home of institutional-grade crypto options analytics. Whether you're trading CeFi options or DeFi options, cryptocurrencies move. Use GVol Analytics to analyze implied volatility, model realized volatility, structure positions, and unlock alpha. For more information, visit gvol.io. That's GVOL.io. Now it's time to dive into the exploding world of cryptocurrencies and digital assets. It's time for the Crypto Rundown.
All right, everybody. That music means it is time once again for the Crypto Rundown, the program here on the old Options Insider Radio Network, where we look a little further afield beyond our traditional landscape of your VIX options or your Tesla or your SPY or any of that fun stuff, and look a little bit farther and see what's going on in the crypto hills. Going to talk Bitcoin, some ETH, maybe a whole bunch of other altcoin, whatever makes it on our radar. Of course, the spot, but also the futures, the options, the volume, the volatility, the SKEW, the OI, and a whole bunch more. My name is Mark Longo from theoptionsinsider.com, as well as, of course, from the aforementioned network. Reminding you a bit of a truncated week here on the network for the upcoming Thanksgiving Day holiday here in the U.S. So get your usual slew of content all the way through Wednesday. So all of you who love to mainline our Options Bootcamp, Options Playbook Radio, they'll be hitting the network as usual on Wednesday. You get your pro Q&A session for everyone over there in the secret club there tomorrow. If you haven't checked that out yet, theoptionsinsider.com/secret club is the place to go to learn more about that. You get access to the pro Q&A sessions, which I know a lot of you love, as well as, of course, Options Oddities and all the live streams and a whole bunch of other fun goodies over there. Theoptionsinsider.com/secret club. And let's see who we're joined by in the old crypto hot seat today. I am pleased to say that we are joined. He's a stalwart here on the network. We're making his first appearance in the crypto hot seat. He's none other than the once and future Dr. VIX himself, Mr. Russell Rhoads. Mr. Rhoads, welcome to the crypto hot seat. What brings you to these environs, sir?
We're gonna talk about how I've been trying to incorporate Bitcoin into a traditional portfolio a little bit later on.
I like it. All right, then let's get the ball rolling. Let's dive right on into the Bitcoin breakdown.
It's time to explore the latest trending activity, trends, and developments across the world's leading crypto market. It's time for the Bitcoin Breakdown.
All right, everybody, welcome to the Bitcoin Breakdown, the portion of the show where we do just that. We break down the week's worth of activity in the world's leading digital asset. Of course, we're talking about the big dog, which is Bitcoin. A little bit smaller coming into today's show than it was on last show. It seems like for the last few weeks, We've been talking about naught but new all-time highs for Bitcoin every time we're coming into the start of the show. This week, seeing a little bit of that bloom come off the rose. Bitcoin on our last show, a little bit north of the 64,000 level. Coming into today's show, Bitcoin a little bit north of the 56,000 level, selling off about 7,500 handles over the course of the past week. And that was pretty much around the range that we saw over the course of this past week. In fact, we're a little bit off of the lows right now. The lows we set were back on Thursday, 55,700. The high was pretty much on our showtime last week, right around 64,000. So, yeah, it's been an interesting week out there. A little bit of the Bitcoin bulls perhaps not getting what they were hoping for after, like I said, so many weeks of new all-time highs just about every week out there. We're going to dive into all the vol and all the fun stuff in a second. But like I said, Mr. Rhodes, you've never joined us before on the Crypto Rundown. So perhaps let's start there. What are your thoughts of the overall crypto markets and indeed the big dog Bitcoin? And how long have you been following this? And what's been catching your eye out there of late, sir?
Well, first, I've been following it for a while. You know, you may not know, but I used to work for the Chicago Board Options Exchange, which is now...
What is this you speak of? I've never heard of this.
SIBO Global Markets. But they,
are you talking about at SIBO? No other branding element, just SIBO?
At SIBO, yeah. So, and, you know, SIBO and CME Group, within a week of each other, came out with the first futures. And I kind of got drafted into doing a road show on the Bitcoin futures around Asia. Because I guess nobody else wanted to go to Asia with the Winklevoss twins because they make you feel small and dumpy when you present with them. But that was kind of, and before that, honestly, I really was not much of a believer. But listening to those guys, they kind of turned me into a true believer. So I've been paying attention ever since then. You know, once I was out on my own and independent like I am now, I've just been looking at different ways. I feel like in time, although we might be there now, but you know, it's going to be a new asset class, and it's going to be an asset class that you want to see how it mixes in with other asset classes, and how should different types of individuals with different risk and return desires, how should they think about approaching crypto? So I've been looking at it from that point of view, less so from the chasing the whatever the flavor is of the week these days. I can't even keep up with that part.
No, that part is
so I've just been focused on the big names. I've been paying attention to, especially with the ETFs coming out. I am a bit surprised. I actually expected more of a sell-off after the ETFs came out, and that was probably just because of my experience after the futures came out, run up into them and then sell off afterwards. But maybe that's what we're experiencing now.
You know, touring Asia with the Winklevi, that'll turn anyone into a true crypto believer, I think, at least a Bitcoin believer at the end of the day. But you're right, your old stomping grounds over there at SIBO, famously getting into the crypto space, then getting out of it just as infamously, and now getting back in. Since the last time you and I chatted, SIBO has acquired RSX, so they do have some crypto offerings of their own out there. So it seems like only a matter of time, Mr. Rhodes, since your old stomping grounds, getting back into the digital asset game. What do you think?
Yes, they are. I think I don't know anything more about that, although I do know people at, needless to say, SIBO, and I'm pretty close with some people at RSX. I didn't know that the deal was coming, although about 6 months ago, I was speaking to someone from RSX, and I said, I know SIBO's going to get back into it. I would not be the least bit surprised if they end up absorbing you guys one way or another. And they're going to call it SIBO Digital, I believe, but I don't think all that's going to close until a couple of months into 2022.
Yeah, I lost track of how many firms SIBO has bought since the last time you and I talked. They've been on a bit of a acquisition rampage. Maybe they bought you since I've talked. I know. Maybe they bought me. Who knows? We'll find out after the showtime here. But let's keep on rolling here. Let's get on out to since we're talking the big dog, let's sink our teeth into that. Of course, all these analytics we're going to break down coming at you courtesy of our friends over there at Genesis Volatility. GVol.io is the place to go to kick the tires and light the fires. If you get in there, I go to the current order book for Deribet. That's what you want to look for these. And you see it's broken down by, of course, the open interest and then the volatility. We're going to start in the vol land. We'll move on to OI in a second. Coming into showtime, Bitcoin vol, pretty much close to where it was this time last week. If you had a guess in our which is the most volatile tradable product question of the week from last week, Bitcoin did not win. And it is at about an 81% right now, so slightly more frothy than it was last week. It was at about a 78% last week. But Bitcoin still not even hanging with the nat gases and the other products, or even, as you'll see a little bit later, the ETHs of the world that are all at or flirting with triple digits right now. Our old friend Simon Ho over there at T3, he, of course, has his BitVol, which is kind of like a surrogate for a Bitcoin VIX. And that's been ticking up a little bit as well, about 3 points as well. It was about a 90 on our last show, a 93 3/4 coming into this show. Let's look at the SKEW here next. And of course, big move out there in Bitcoin SKEW, even bigger on BitSKEW. I'll get to that in a second. Last show was almost a -1 in terms of SKEW. This week, swinging a little bit more pronounced to the negative territory, almost a -4, about a -3.8. And again, that makes sense given what we've seen in the broad price action of Bitcoin. I've been saying for a while now on the show, it seems like no one wants to play in the Bitcoin puts, and it needs a bit of a sell-off to really kick those into higher gear. And at least from a SKEW perspective, we're seeing that kicking in. We're seeing a big move out there in BitSKEW. In fact, I wrote to Simon about this. We'll see if he has any thoughts. They're a little bit ahead of us over there, so he's probably asleep right now. But when he wakes up, he probably will see it because it has been a big move in his BitSKEW. On our last show, it was nearly an 81, about an 80 3/4. This show, 71.75. So a 9-point reduction in the SKEW, which is interesting. It's even more interesting when you think of when we had him on the show not that long ago to talk about this and announce it. The bottom of that range for pretty much the past year has been about a 77. So the BitSKEW, at least according to Simon's analysis, has broken through that lower level of the 52-week range. It ranged from about a 77 to about a 95 over the course of the past year. And you know, we've had some pretty big movements in Bitcoin over the course of the past year. So I thought it was interesting that we are now setting new lows for the year in BitSKEW, which is kind of fascinating. Also fascinating when you hear this next stat I'm about to read to you. If you're still in that GVOL analytics, click on over to the OI and you'll see what I'm talking about, listeners. We're seeing a bit of movement from an open interest perspective, but not a ton. The calls are up about 3,000 contracts to about 137,000 contracts open compared to this time last week, I should say. And then the puts are quite literally unched. There were 62,300 of them open on the show last week. There are 62,300 of them open this week. So the puts have not changed a whit, at least net, from last show to this show. Yet we've seen remarkable changes in the SKEW over that time, which is a little bit fascinating. Mr. RHOADS, A, have you had a chance to play around with any of these crypto analytics out there? And B, what are your thoughts on some of these numbers I've been throwing at our audience here? A big swing in SKEW without a commensurate change in OI and some of the volume levels we're seeing out there in Bitcoin, sir.
I have played around with BitSKEW before and the different volatility indexes that are based on Bitcoin and found they were pretty much comparable to what we expect out of VIX, with one, stark difference. You don't have quite the, call versus put SKEW that you do in the VIX, in the VIX complex. And I did make it 13 minutes without mentioning VIX. But I think it's going to be a good indication of what the mind of the market is. If you've got you do give me show notes ahead of time, and I'm a professional and I do look at them ahead of time. And I thought it was interesting that the open interest for the puts is unchanged week over week, with, Bitcoin down, about 17% or so. And then also you show that where the open interest is, as far as expirations go, a lot of the open interest is already out in December. And that just makes me wonder if there are folks that got themselves some puts thinking that after we get the launch, going along with my thinking, we get the launch of a handful of ETFs, then maybe we start to have a sell-off, and they haven't taken profits on those yet. So that unchanged put open interest makes me think that smart folks trading options on Bitcoin think that we've got more downside to go.
Yeah, that is surprising that we have seen literally unched out there in the options. We'll break it all down a little bit further, see if we can solve that mystery, because you're right, you have seen a pretty aggressive sell-off over the course of the past week, and yet people, for whatever reason, aren't piling into new put positions, or they aren't taking off the ones that they have. So we haven't seen really a change in either direction. Either way, it's strange to see it almost down to the contract unched from a week ago. Speaking of the OI, let's see where you folks are lining up. For a while now, December has been leading the charge, and that remains the case by more than 2-1 still. Almost 100,000 contracts, 96,700 to be precise. It's up about 2,300 from this time last week. November, a distant number 2, and Spoiler alert, is not going to have time to catch December before it goes off the board here. 44,300 contracts opened in November. It's up about 3,300 from this time last week. And March, bringing up the rear with 23,000. That's up about 2,000 from this time last week. Interesting to see if March can kick it into high gear before December rolls off the board. I'm guessing probably not, but we've seen crazier things out there. In terms of the notional value of that OI, since we didn't see a huge change in the OI, we didn't really see a huge change in the notional value of that OI either. We saw it's about 12 billion open on Deribit last week and about a little over 13 billion. You add in all the other venues like CME and LedgerX and everything. And it's pretty much the same level this week, about 12 billion open on Deribit and about 13 and change billion open when you add in everybody else. In terms of the notional volume going up, a little bit of a different story. It's been pretty steady over the course of the past few weeks. That's pretty much how you could describe this week as well. Very steady, no crazy 2+ billion notional volume days, but well over a billion multiple days again over the past week. The biggest day was the 16th with about 1.3 billion on the tape. The 18th, we had about 1.1 billion. And then the 19th and today both had about 749 million. Obviously, today is still going, so we'll see where today tops out at. But a very steady, very heavy week. If nothing, again, no single day blowing the doors off, but a lot of paper day after day, which again, is something you want to see if you're out there trading these things. And in terms of what are the size positions, where are you folks lining up? It's been remarkably biased to the upside for quite some time out there in Bitcoin, and that's not going to change this week, listeners. The par strike, aka the 100,000 strike, is at about 17,000 contracts opens. That remains our largest, our most sizable position open in Bitcoin options right now. It's up about 2,000 contracts from this time last week. Number 2 is the 80,000 strike with about 12,000 contracts open. That's, again, unchanged from this time last week. Number 3 is the 70,000 strike with 11,000 contracts open. It's actually down about 2,000 from this time last week. Number 4, the ever optimistic 120,000 strike. That has 10,000 contracts open. That also is unchanged from last week. And number 5, the super optimistic 200,000 strike. That has 8,300 contracts open. It's up a whopping 100 contracts from this time last week. So a whole bunch of nothing from a change of OI perspective from this time last week. Now we're getting to the part of the show where Mr. RHOADS has just been champing at the bit to get here. So let's dive into it. We're going to talk about the futures. And I know, Mr. RHOADS, you've been pretty busy since the last time I chatted with you, crunching the numbers on a couple of things. First off, the old Bitcoin futures versus what a lot of people like to and have been using to play Bitcoin for quite some time, which is, of course, the Grayscale Bitcoin Trust. So if you have some thoughts on those two, maybe a bit of a compare and contrast, the futures versus the Bitcoin Trust, and then you take all of that and you lump it together as your crypto allocation, where does that fall? What place should that have in a traditional portfolio, sir? A lot to unpack, so have at it.
Well, okay. First off, before we jump into that one, because in preparation for the show, I re-listened to the last couple of weeks of this show where you had the gentleman from ProShares on, and there've been a lot. I just want to point one thing out with respect to the negative roll yield that we've experienced in comparable products. I took a look at basically again VIX. I took a look at the roll yield in VIX before those ETNs got launched and the roll yield afterwards. And the roll yield before really wasn't there. It was caused by the ETNs. It went from less than, I think 0.09% a day or something like that. It tripled or so. There has been no change so far in what would be considered a negative roll yield for the front 2-month Bitcoin futures that trade at CME Group. So that's something I'm keeping a close eye on, because now I'm going to get to what you just kind of gave me the intro for. I did a couple of years ago. I just took a look at spot Bitcoin as a diversifier for a traditional stock bond portfolio. And I looked at a lot of different stock bond portfolios. I went from fully weighted stocks to fully weighted bonds, and I went in 5% increments. And then what I did was I equally took a little bit of capital away from each and rebalanced each month and had 1% exposure to Bitcoin. And the 1% exposure to Bitcoin, needless to say, does improve the performance of the portfolio, just something that you would expect. But also, it results in a much nicer Sharpe ratio, regardless of whether you're all stocks and you take 1% and start putting it in Bitcoin and rebalancing every month, or you're all bonds. There was a nice improvement in the risk-adjusted performance, and that even holds true during a couple of the periods where Bitcoin came under pressure. 2014 and 2018 were pretty tough years. I go all the way back to 2011 using Bitcoin, and it really wasn't, it didn't help performance. But on a risk-adjusted basis, it actually wasn't so bad to have a little bit in Bitcoin. I kind of updated that study, and I included the Grayscale Bitcoin Trust, because I think a lot of people, that's kind of your securities account method of getting involved in Bitcoin these days. I can't really reconstruct the 3 new ETFs because there's some discretion behind those ETFs. So I felt like the Grayscale Trust was the best one to use. And then I also used the CME futures for Bitcoin exposure instead of spot Bitcoin. And this goes along with, I'm terrible with names and I apologize, but this goes along with what the guy from ProShares was saying, that even the second month Bitcoin future has a pretty nice beta relative to what's going on.
Yeah,
in
he was
spot
very
Bitcoin.
keen on that point. He wanted to point out that the second month's not going to be like a USO where you're crushing the tracking if you move out the second month.
Not at all. And because my methodology, and I know for radio it's kind of tough to visualize all of these moving parts, but the methodology involved rebalancing to 1% Bitcoin, regardless of whether it's the Grayscale Trust, the CME product, or the spot Bitcoin at the end of each month. So what I did for the futures was at the end of this month, we would sell the December contract on November 30th, and we would buy the January contract. That way you don't have to roll twice, because the Bitcoin expiration, sometimes it's the last day of the month, but very often it's a day or two before the end of the month. So I just felt like that second month was a good thing to use for that test. And the second month and the Grayscale Trust, the performance is right in line with spot Bitcoin as far as improving. So both ways improve improve your Sharpe ratio, improve your performance a little bit. And, actually the CME futures are closer to spot Bitcoin Sharpe ratios than the Grayscale Trust is. So just a little shout out to my buddies over there at CME Group.
That's interesting. I'm looking at your methodology here, and I love your allocation, 1% to Bitcoin.
It's risk capital.
Yeah.
It's and that really is, we know I'm like half in the professional world and half in the academic world. And, what we mean when we say risk capital in both worlds is money that you could afford to lose that is not going to, it's not going to change your lifestyle. I think Jim Bittman always used that, it's not going to change, your lifestyle at all. And so I assume if you're just using 1%, it improves the performance, but it's also a level that just about every level of investor probably could tolerate.
That's fascinating to me that even that nominal amount, 1%, was enough to markedly impact performance, which is usually you see 1% of any asset. It's not really going to do much for you, right? But Bitcoin's been so volatile and it's moved enough that it actually, that's good. So I'm looking at this right now because we get a lot of pushback from people. People are scared of crypto. They don't want to touch it. Maybe they have a traditional portfolio, 75%, 25%. And you just tweaked it a little bit. You went 74.25% for stocks, 24.75% for bonds, and you took that leftover 1%. You didn't even take a full percent from bonds. You just took 0.25% from bonds, 0.75% from stocks, and you allocated that 1% to Bitcoin, and it had an interesting impact. That's interesting. You can probably call this, let's say, the reluctant crypto investor portfolio. What do you say?
I think it's the crypto. It's crypto for everyone. See, now that's something that would sell.
Ooh, crypto for every man.
I know that. I'm going after the Robinhood crowd with that one.
I think you don't need to hit them. They're already down the rabbit hole.
That was half out of my mouth, and I was like, well, that doesn't.
You got to get the people on the other end of the spectrum who are still a little bit reluctant. I want to see this done on Shiba Inu. Then you'll get the Robinhood crowd. They'll be all over you there. So I'm curious for you. Have you come down on a preferred vector right now in terms of the Grayscale Bitcoin Trust versus the Bitcoin futures because they each have their kind of pros and cons, right? The grayscale Bitcoin, some days it's at a premium, some days it's at a discount, obviously more attractive at a discount than at a premium. Then, of course, you have the Bitcoin futures, of course, the BITO, which has the roll yield, which, by the way, I did throw your roll yield numbers at the ProShares guy. I used the Russell Rhodes number of about 1% per month, and he kind of pushed back on that a little bit. He thought it'd be more like 0.5%. So he was trying to defend his product.
It's less than that right now.
He thought it was
a low number.
He thought it was kind of the early blush, and I could certainly see that. It was a crazy time when those options first listed there. So those numbers kind of hard to extrapolate too much from them. So the drag maybe not as much of a factor with BITO as we perhaps initially thought. It's certainly nowhere in the realm of a VXX or something crazy like that. So I'm curious for you, Mr. Rhodes, do you have a preferred vehicle these days in terms of folks out there, they want to use the BITO or the futures maybe directly or the grayscale truster?
Well, the thing is, right now I've got all three. And again, the numbers were a little bit better for spot's a little bit better than the futures, which is a little bit better than grayscale, but you got to look really close at the slide to even see the difference in some of the different types of allocations. I was genuinely, I love it when the numbers surprise me. Because again, I know I probably should get charged if I say VIX one more time, but because the second month VIX future doesn't really have a good beta relative to spot VIX, which can work to its benefit as well. My assumption was using the second month CME future was not going to work out particularly well, and I was surprised by that one. And now that you have these smaller size contracts where it can fit into a portfolio quite nicely, probably, if I came out of retirement and started running money again, I probably would stick with the futures. In part of that's also because of just custodian issues that you have with spot Bitcoin.
Yes, there are a legion of issues no matter which way you go. Again, the ProShares, they sounded like they weren't too concerned about the position limits. A, for the reason you mentioned, if you go farther out in the curve, the tracking is still pretty decent. And B, they seem like they seemed pretty intent that if they bumped up against them, CME would work with them because they knew this was a home run for them as well. And of course, I'll have Tim McCourt from CME, who oversees this stuff, on TWIFO coming up in the next couple of weeks. So we'll get the official CME perspective on this as well, listeners. Will they adjust those position limits? Will they keep doing it if BITO keeps exploding in popularity? We'll find out, but I think everyone behind the scenes seems to think that is the case. So they didn't seem too concerned by any of these, which is interesting. So fascinating stuff. Mr. Rhodes, I know you did this as a webinar, I believe, in conjunction with the folks over there at IB, but is this available anywhere else if folks want to check out your analysis of the diversification benefits of Bitcoin, sir?
Well, right now, I think it's recorded on the Interactive Brokers website, so you can find it there. This in the academic world, if you're working on something and you trust that people won't steal it, you kind of go around and talk about what you're working on and get a little bit of feedback. And now that I'm at Indiana, I get to participate in more and more of those presentations. And that's kind of how I'm approaching this, where this is going to lead to a paper, but I want people to push back on me and tell me where I'm wrong, where things are kind of stupid. Should I be looking at Ethereum as well? I also, there's a handful of ETFs that kind of branded themselves as Bitcoinish ETFs because they owned companies that had blockchain type exposure. Those didn't work out particularly well. I'm probably going to run some stuff with Ether as well. But and also like maybe a portfolio of the top 5 each month, which there's a fund out in San Francisco that does that. I can't remember what the name of that firm is. But so there are lots of little nuances that came out of the presentation I did with IB, where people sent me emails or put things in the chat box and said, you should look at this or you should look at that. I haven't gotten any of the little nasty grams yet.
You got to be the hot professor on campus. If you're the guy crunching the numbers on Bitcoin, all the students must want to talk to you, sir.
Oh, the professors too. It's kind of funny. Because I think I'm the only one at the KELLEY School of Business right now that really does focus in on this area.
There you go. Yep. Tenured for life, sir. You're good. If you're the guy talking about crypto in the faculty, they'll keep you around. I used to like the old one guy used to talk about derivatives. You were that one guy, so they would keep you around. Now you add crypto to that, double whammy. They can't fire you. you are safe for life, sir, which is the goal of all academics, right?
Yes, it is.
But I like what you mentioned about the riots and the maras, because you're right. Everyone was trying to use those as their crypto surrogates and loading into these meme-heavy stocks. I don't see the numbers here in this, but you mentioned that they did not perform as well, the funds that allocated towards those.
No, and that's like it's kind of like, and I go back to my old CFA days. They always say that REITs are not really good real estate representatives in a portfolio because there's this influence of the stock market, and that's the exact same thing that was happening to those funds. So what I expected, which was very little out of them, is exactly what I got.
So there you go, listeners, all you folks who think you can do the same thing with Riot and Mara. You had a nice little run there for a little bit, but over time, yeah, not quite. That's also something I did put to the ProShares folks, because I was a little bit alarmed when I saw in their prospectus that if they need to, they can go out into those underlyings as well. And I was like, I don't know if that's quite apples to apples. You limit on the CME futures, so you go load up on Mara. Not quite the same thing. That's going to have an impact on your tracking. They kind of hinted that that would be far down the realm if they ever went there at all. So yeah, their prospectus perhaps a little bit more alarming than the reality out there. Let's see what the reality is for the futures right now coming into showtime, and the options, of course, over there at CME. Again, things have been more active in general since the launch of BITO, and we're seeing that with the options as well. You know, that OI out there has ticked up quite a bit over the course of the past few weeks. Like we're seeing, for example, the options, they used to do sometimes 100, 20, sometimes 30 contracts in a week, nothing. And then these days, we've had multiple days with a couple of hundred contracts, and we're seeing the OI ticking up again this week, up nearly 300 contracts to a little over 1,200, about 1,250 or so, which again isn't a ton, but when you're talking a 5X contract and the one that could do sometimes 3 or 5 contracts a day, that's actually a big increase. So things are ticking up out there. Going over to the futures, similar deal. OI up a little bit, up to about 14,300. We saw a massive inrush into the futures after the BITO product launch that has mitigated somewhat. And let's see, what do we have on the tape on Friday? About 11,000 contracts going up on Friday. So we're seeing steady business, but it's not, the 20 plus to 30 plus thousand contracts we have seen in some of the more active days out there in the CME futures. Micro Bitcoin futures, which is probably where most of you will be hanging your hats out there, they're getting more love again. We saw a lot of OI in the immediate wake of the BITO launch. A lot of that rolled off the board with expiration. We're starting to see that replaced. Now the OI has ticked up to nearly 35,000, about 34,400. It's up about 7,000 from this time last week. Had a pretty active day on Friday as well, with about 24, almost 25,000 contracts on the tape. So a lot going on out there in the world of all things Bitcoin. But now we got to keep on rolling. It is time to explore pretty much everything else. It is time to explore the altcoin universe.
It's time to move beyond Bitcoin and find out what's moving the rest of the crypto marketplace. It's time to boldly venture into the altcoin universe.
All right, everybody. Welcome to the altcoin universe, the portion of the show where we do just that. We explore what's lighting it up out there in the rest of the crypto market. Let's break it up with a top 10. Our producers are getting clever out there. They know a lot of you like some of the sillier altcoin. Others of you hate them. But either way, you're fascinated by them. So they have expanded our top 10 this week, not just to an 11, but to a 12. I'm guessing you could probably figure out why, because number 12 is our old friend Shiba Inu. I'm sad to say it has taken a bit of a downturn. So it can go down, listeners. There, it's off, nearly 16%, down to about 24 billion worth of OI out there. Number 11 is Dogecoin, following hot on its heels, down to about 29 billion worth of market cap. Number 10 in the actual real top 10 out there is Avalanche. You'll recall we had John Peroso from Crypto Patterns on the show recently, and he was talking up Avalanche. He was a fan of this one. Well, the market is a fan of this one as well. It's one of the few bucking the trends here, up quite a bit, up to about 143. It's up to about 32 billion worth of market cap since the last time we crunched these numbers, and certainly the first time we've seen AVAX, which is Avalanche, out there cracking the top 10. So interesting stuff. Maybe John coming on and talking it up last week triggered some of that volume. Number 9, good old USD coin at about 36.5 billion. Number 8, Polkadot, 39, a little bit north of 39 billion this week. Number 7, our old friend XRP, hanging out there at 49 billion. Number 6, it's Cardano, 59 and about a half billion. That one's been selling off a little bit out there as well. Number 5, it's Solana. Solana still holding out over the 200 level at about a 221 coming into Showtime. It's about 67 billion worth of market cap. This thing has had just a tremendous run over the course of the past couple of months, and it remains volatile, up to nearly 250, down to nearly 200s, all over the place over the course of the past few weeks. Tether holding firm at number 4, about 73.25 billion worth of market cap. Number 3 is Binance Coin at about 94 billion, so ticking up out there. And then our old friend ETH coming in at number 2. Again, both ETH and Bitcoin coming in lighter than they were this time last week. ETH at about a little bit shy of $500 billion, 492 on the board this week. And Bitcoin flirting with breaking the 1T level again to the dark side. Not quite doing it at about 1.07 trillion worth of market cap out there. Still holding firm at number 1. Mr. RHOADS, I know you've been crunching a lot of the numbers in the Bitcoin futures and looking at the Grayscale Trust and looking at Riot and Mara and everything else out there at Bitcoin. But when you're not looking at Bitcoin, have you had a chance to explore any of the altcoin universe, sir?
Not beyond reading headlines about them and scratching my head. I mean, I guess I'm aging now because I just can't totally understand them yet. I know that's the best guess answer ever, huh?
I'm intrigued by your Prince coin, though, where you're teaming up with that Nigerian prince. I think that would be a hit.
Yeah, I've decided to start my own altcoin called Prince Coin. And I'm going to team up with a Nigerian prince who needs a little help. And he's going to profit from the little help as he finds people in the United States willing to, deposit a little money and help him, get his $4 million or whatever out of Nigeria. We're going to split the difference there, and people that buy my Prince Coin altcoin, you're going to reap some of the profits from that. So if you'd like to participate in what apparently has been a successful venture ever since email was invented, join Prince Coin.
It's amazing that there's just a surplus of Nigerian princes available for you to choose from, sir. It really is a embarrassment of riches on your behalf, sir.
So there, that's what I think of altcoins right there.
So he lumps the entirety of the altcoin universe, listeners, in with the Nigerian email frauds, which were ripe in, let's say, the mid to late 90s, but still pop up every now and then out there. Send your hate mail to Russell Rhodes over there at EQ Derivatives. As you look at the number 2 out there, even though I know it's number 1 in a lot of your hearts, which is ETH. ETH taking a little bit of a break this week as well. Most of the major crypto products were this week. ETH on our last show was flirting with 4,600s at about a 45.93, coming in nearly 500 handles this week, down to about 491 coming into Showtime. It was a little bit north of 4,100, 4,102 to be precise when we kicked off the show. Vol, though, as I mentioned at the start of the show, ticking up, so moving a little bit differently than Bitcoin. Bitcoin ticked up a little bit. ETH gapping up a little over 10 points, about 11 points, so back up over the triple digits level, up to about a 104 right now. We should have put ETH in our which is most volatile question for last week. That would have been an interesting one to see how you folks wrestle with ETH as opposed to Bitcoin. But alas, we did not. The SKEW last week, similar aggressive downside moves here in the SKEW as well. Last week, we were about a positive almost 0.5. This week, coming at Showtime, negative 4.3. So over a 4-point handle swing to the dark side out there. They do have an ETH SKEW if you are intrigued over there at T3 Index as well. I didn't pull it up for the show, but you can find it the same place you find the BIT SKEW. You tick over one tab, you can see the ETH SKEW as well. I would imagine it has swung to the dark side as well. In terms of OI, we've seen a little bit of a move in ETH, most of it to the call wing, which is kind of interesting. The call open interest up to well over 1 million. It was just a little bit over 1 million on the last show. This week, it's 1.1 million. It's up about 70,000 contracts in this time last week. So a lot more action on ETH calls. Puts kind of unched, which again is interesting. We're seeing these big changes in SKEW without a huge commensurate change net in the OI of the options and the put wing in both Bitcoin and in VIX. Oh, excuse me, in VIX. I got Dr. VIX whispering in my ear here in the puts on ETH there, which are still at about 438,000. It's up slightly from this time last week, up about 2,000. In terms of the notional value, what's open out there? Again, not a huge change. It's about 7 billion last week and about 7 billion this week, even though we did see a pretty active week, kind of like Bitcoin. Nothing blowing the doors off, but steady volume all week long. Pretty much every day this past week was north of 500 million worth of notional volume. Some days hitting 600 million, some days hitting nearly 800 million. So pretty active days out there. Nothing, again, hitting $1 billion, but flirting with it multiple times out there. So pretty active week in the ETH options camp. Going out to where you folks are lining up from an expiration perspective. Similar story to Bitcoin. It's kind of all quarterlies all the time, but we know ETH is even more quarterly dominated than Bitcoin is, and that's reflected in the expirations. Up 632,000 contracts open. It's up about nearly 60,000 from this time last week. March number 2, 353,000 contracts, up 31,000. And unlike Bitcoin, which Nove is a clear number 2 in there, November is a pretty distant number 3, only 276,000 contracts, up about 39,000, but not enough to catch even probably March before November rolls off the board, which goes to show people are positioning for the longer term at ETH. They're not exactly just loading up on a bunch of front month gamma and get these big swings like they are in products like Bitcoin, which is kind of interesting in terms of positioning for where you folks are lining up from a size options position perspective. Let's go the opposite way. Let's start at the bottom this time. Number 5 out there for our top 5 in ETH options, the 7,000 strike with 62,000 contracts open. It's up about 6,000 from this time last week. Number 4, got the 6,000 strike with about 87,000 contracts open, also up about 6,000 from this time last week. Number 3, the 10,000 strike with 100,000 contracts open. It's up about 5,000 from this time last week. Number 2, the 15K strike, the ever optimistic 15,000. So if 10,000 is not optimistic enough for you listeners, how's the 15,000 strike sound? To the tune of 109,000 contracts open up there. This is not nothing. This is some serious paper up there. Up 13,000 contracts from this time last week. And number 1 remains the slightly optimistic 5,000 strike with 122,000 contracts opens up about 16,000 from this time last week. So we're talking a lot about the futures over there at CME from a Bitcoin perspective. They are planning sometime in the near future to launch the micro ETH futures out there. I think that'll really be interesting, give them a nice shot in the arm. OI out there is a little bit north of 5,000, almost 5,200. It's actually down a couple of hundred from this time last week. So not a lot of love on the ETH futures. The most recent trading day, about 5,500 contracts out there. Again, I think the micro Bitcoin micro ETH futures will really kick things off to another level. So Mr. Rhodes, I know you think all of altcoin is kind of a Nigerian scam, but I'm curious for you, the ETH futures are trading over there. So you do have some assets to sink your teeth into from an ETH perspective on CME. Have you looked at ETH at all in terms of maybe a second behind Bitcoin for your research, sir?
Yeah, Ether. That is the number one thing to check out relative to, to drop in the same model that I was using for Bitcoin. So that's the number one thing to put there. And also my understanding is I think the utility behind Ethereum is better than Bitcoin. And I do think at some point during our lifetime that the market cap of it will surpass Bitcoin. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I think a lot of our guests have come on talking about the flippening, the moment when ETH does surpass it. And I think, yeah, you're right. I think it's very clear to think that there actually is some utility to be found in ETH, right? Versus zero in Bitcoin. So any utility is an increase. And certainly ETH is kind of the foundation of a lot of the other projects that everyone's so excited about out there right now. And everyone's working to try to find maybe ETH 2.0 and all these other altcoin like Solana and others are racing to the top of the charts as a result. But you're right. ETH still, I know, near and dear to a lot of you out there and slowly coming on the radar of our friend, Mr. Rhodes, when he's not busy out there putting together his Prince coin for the altcoin. Let's look at a couple other altcoin really quickly, then we'll get some of your questions on here. Ripple, good old XRP, our old friend, still hanging out around $1, but a bit of a downside week here, down about 16 cents. So all of you out there, I know most of you still can't trade it. The SEC is hanging over this thing like a sword of Damocles. So most of the major platforms won't let you sling your old XRP. So you've been kind of sitting on the sidelines watching some big movements in this one over the past year or so, but that doesn't seem to be changing anytime soon. But again, if you were hoping to scoop some up once all the dust is cleared and you could actually access it again, then at least you're going to get it a little bit cheaper than you were this time last week. Good old Doge taking a bit of a hit, down a little over 4 cents from this time last week. It was flirting with 26 cents last week, 21 cents and change this week. A Litecoin, everyone's favorite pump and dunk from a few months ago, also taking a big drubbing this week. Last week it was 264, almost 265. Coming into today's show, 206. So down about 58 handles from this time last week. That's a big drubbing out there. In Litecoin land, we got Cardano selling off. Like I said, I mentioned as well, it was north of $2 last week. Cardano's been an interesting one to watch of late. All those out there in the smart contract land gets north of $2 and it kind of gives it up a little bit again and gets north of it again. Kind of on the latter portion this week, giving it up again this week, down to about 177, down about 26 cents from this time last week. Polkadot, another one a lot of you have come to admire out there. On our last show, about 45, almost $46 this week, 39 and a quarter, down about almost 6.5 handles from this time last week. And Solana, like I said, still north of 200, but some big swings. It was nearly 240 last week, 239 and about a half. Coming into today's show, about 217 and change. So down 21, almost 22 handles from this time last week, which for Solana is almost a rounding error. This thing can move. And then, of course, everyone's favorite Shiba. I won't even start with the decimals on this one. It was a million decimals, 5.5. Now it's 0.43. So taking a bit of a hit out there in Shiba land as well. I know some of our Secret Club friends are fans of this one. So alas, it can go down. But let's keep on rolling, answer some of your questions before we get out of here. It's time for your crypto questions.
You've got questions about crypto. Who doesn't? It's time to find out the answers to your crypto questions.
Mr. Rhodes has his own crypto question. He wants to know if any of these crazy decimal sub 1 cent altcoin will reverse split. That would be hilarious, Mr. Rhodes, if that were to happen.
If they know they can do that, I'll bet you they do it.
But then they lose all their luster, right? Because
But you know what would happen? If one of these announced a reverse split, it would go up like 10,000% immediately. Remember when?
Yeah.
We're old enough to remember whenever an internet company back in 98, 99 announced a split, the thing rallied immediately. It's like a stock was at 100 and they said, well, we're going to split 2 for 1. And, which means it was going to go down to 50 and the damn thing would go to 200 by the end of that day. That's the same mentality that we're living with right now.
I guess you'd have to dump it that day, literally, because you're right. Because one of the attractions of these things, right, is that you can put $100 into, let's say, a Shibu, and you get 1.8 million shares. I mean, it's ridiculous. So just the size of it alone is part of the attraction. You couldn't do a 10 for, you have to do like 1,000 for one reverse split. And even still, that you're barely going to budge the needle there. So that would take some of the luster, I think, some of the bloom off the rose for all the Shiba kids out there who like owning millions of shares of something. It just needs to tick a decimal point, Mr. Rhodes, and you got that Lambo parked in the driveway. So that's what they're going for out there. Every decimal point, a Lambo. As we keep on rolling, let's get out some of our other questions here. Let's go to Mythos. We were kind of talking about this earlier, but we can kind of dive into it again. He says, hello, Crypto Rundown. Well, hello, Mythos. He says, very much enjoying this program. Glad to hear that someone is talking about this side of the crypto market rather than just drooling over spot all day long. Yeah, we try not to drool here on the show, Mythos. We try to take a nice objective perspective. I'll leave it to Mr. Rhodes. He's drooling over all of his Nigerian Prince coin out there. He says, I've been looking at both BITO and GBTC for my account. Do you have a preference in the two of them? And are there specifics that you've noticed when trading them that we should be aware of? Thanks so much. Well, again, we kind of just sunk our teeth into this earlier. I had Mr. Rhodes answer this earlier, so I'll give my thoughts on this, and then I'll let Mr. Rhodes respond if he wants. But for me, I haven't really traded a lot of the GBTC for the reason I'm sure a lot of you can surmise. It's in the name of the network. It's the Options Insider Radio Network. There are no options on the grayscale of Bitcoin. So you're kind of just putting it on at either the premium or the discount. That was enough for our friend, Mr. Bill, on our Pro Q&A last week. He likes just getting the grayscale of Bitcoin at a discount. He sees that as kind of his surrogate to putting on BITO and doing covered calls against it. To each their own. For me, I like to use the options as opposed to the underlying. So for me, BITO is the obvious choice. And I have played around a little bit, like I said, in some upside, actually some flies out there, because the call SKEW when it first launched was pretty nuts. So you got to put on things like verticals or even more so like flies for ridiculous nominal outlays. And those are pretty much lottery ticket trades, listeners. You can hit a home run or you don't. But they were fun, and I've done a few of those, but I haven't traded it over the course of the past couple of weeks. But that's been my preferred vector in BITO. If you are going to trade BITO, the underlying, I do recommend having something against it to the upside. You get some nice hefty premiums for these covered calls out there. A little bit less this week than you would last week, but still, intriguing stuff. So if you are concerned about the drag, and again, we touched on earlier in the show, the drag is perhaps not as much as we initially thought in this product, so maybe it shouldn't be as much of a concern. But if you want to make up for that, then that's one way you could do so. So Mr. Rhoades, I asked you this earlier, what your preference was, if you have any additions you want to add to that, and also the fact that BITO is optionable and the Grayscale Trust is not. Does that change your analysis at all?
No, not really. And actually, one of the things that I was doing when I said, give me a couple minutes, and nobody else saw that but you, I wanted to see what BITO, and I know we're supposed to call it BIT because of Bitcoin. I want to see what BITO had done since its first day versus the Grayscale Bitcoin Trust. And BITO's down 17.2% and Grayscale's down 12.135%. Which, again, I always get excited when I see numbers that I can't quite explain. That's a pretty big difference there. So I'm going to have to do some digging and see maybe. And what I'm doing is I'm taking the first day that BITO closed, and it's very possible that it was at quite a premium because so much money rushed into it when it came out there. So it might be being hurt by that. But where I'm going with this is the jury's still out on the 3 ETFs that are now out. I don't want to watch them for a few months and, kind of monitor how they do relative to spot. How do they do relative to the futures? There's a little discretion around. I know there's some discretion with respect to BITO, so I want to see how that's being handled and, just get a better feel for the new ones before I maybe shift from using the Grayscale Trust. I've given you more non-answers today than you know what to do.
Look at you preaching, taking your time and doing your research. What fun is that, sir? We want to dive boldly into these new underlying sight unseen, sir. That's where the fun is. Well, listeners, unfortunately, that music means we come to the end. Another fun journey through the world of all things crypto. We talked the futures, the spot on Bitcoin, and he talked about some of the other products you folks may be thinking about scratching the chins of trading. Everyone's got BITO on the brain, but also the Grayscale Trust out there. How do they compare and contrast? Even a 1% allocation, can that do something for you over there? Mr. Rhoades crunched the numbers for you out there. And, of course, all the altcoin and a whole bunch more. I want to thank you for joining us here. And before we go, Mr. Rhoades, if folks want to hit you up about this, I'm sure after they see this and they hear this, they'll have some questions or perhaps some strongly worded comments for you. If they want to share those with you, where should they go? What should they do?
The best place to find me is Rhoades. It's my last name, RHOADS, spelled a little bit differently, at eqderivatives.com. That's where I'm hanging my professional hat these days.
You can also give him a follow on the old Twitters. He does post a lot of his research there. He's been retweeting here during the show. I notice you're no longer an energized ape, sir.
No. I'm focusing on my focus, which I heard in a motivational video this morning.
I was going to say, I'm not familiar with that. It must be an academic thing that I'm not aware of there. But hit him up. You want to be one of the early adopters of his Nigerian Prince coin? Hit him up on the old Twitters at Russell Rhoades, 2 S's, 2 L's, and then RHOADS on the end. Hey, can we expect a book on crypto volatility perhaps sometime in the future, sir?
No. The next book is going to be about Mr. Buffett.
The crypto one would sell.
I'm all over the place.
The Buffett one will sell too. I'm not saying that won't sell.
I'm going to tell you what I'm doing, and I'm not going to say what it is because the last time I gave away a good book idea, somebody else wrote it. You even had them on a program. I'm still a little mad at you about that. But I'm doing something. I'm taking a different approach with respect to Buffett that other people haven't. So we'll just leave it at that.
Interesting stuff. Mr. Rhoades mad at me.
I'll tell you when we're off.
Mr. Rhoades is going to make me buy his Nigerian Prince coin now as a punishment, listeners. But check him out. You can also find his books. He has a legion of them, most of them about volatility and VIX. Find them on Amazon over there. That same spelling, RHOADS, is the place to go. You know where to go to kick the tires and light the fires on all things Bitcoin and indeed altcoin. It's gvol.io. I could argue that some of those analytics more important these days than ever as we're seeing these markets evolve and grow and mature and then sell off and all sorts of new names coming onto the scene these days. A lot more to pay attention to. gvol.io is the place to go to kick the tires and light the fires. We got to head on out of here, but we'll be back again tomorrow. Pro Q&A session. I do believe it's a little bit earlier tomorrow. I do believe it's 11 a.m. if I am correct. 11:30 a.m. with Mr. John Sherry, the guy who heads up all the options over there at Northern Trust. You folks asked for him back, so we obliged. Talk about how large funds and everyone else is out there using options these days, large individual accounts. They have a lot of them over there at Northern Trust. Maybe we'll touch on crypto a little bit as well, probably given the fact that you guys take the reins and ask the questions. Probably some crypto will sneak in there as well. So if you haven't checked out the Secret Club yet for yourselves, what are you waiting for? TheOptionsInsider.com/Secret Club is the place to go to kick the tires and light the fires. You guys will get your double dose of education this week as well. Options Playbook Radio and Options Bootcamp on Wednesday. Then we're off for the Thanksgiving Day holiday here in the U.S. And Friday, of course, a truncated trading day. So I'm not going to be a monster and drag folks into Juice shows. So off on Friday as well. Back again next Monday, another episode of the Crypto Rundown. Have a good holiday, everybody.
This program is brought to you by Genesis Volatility, also known as GVol, home of institutional-grade crypto options analytics. Whether you're trading CeFi options or DeFi options, cryptocurrencies move. Use GVol Analytics to analyze implied volatility, model realized volatility, structure positions, and unlock alpha. For more information, visit gvol.io. That's GVOL.io. You're listening to the Options Insider Radio Network, the home of the Options Podcast. For more quality options programs, visit theoptionsinsider.com or search for Options Insider Radio Network in your podcast provider of choice. Listeners can also access all of our programming through our mobile app available in the iTunes and Google Play stores. Select programs are also available via live stream at mixlr.com/options-insider. That's mixlr.com/options-insider. Don't forget to follow along with your favorite programs and submit your own questions for the hosts at twitter.com/options, stocktwits.com/options, facebook.com/theoptionsinsider, or via questions at theoptionsinsider.com.